Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back with us today Liz Peek. She's a columnist for FoxNews.com and the Fiscal Times, and we just really enjoy having her with us. Very insightful. By the way, her website, if you want to connect with her, is lizpeek.com. lizpeek.com. Liz, good to see you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. Good to see you again. Well, listen, before we get into a lot of things, your thought on, well, 3 weeks ago today, the Paris tragedy, and then, of course, just a couple of days ago, San Bernardino. What's your take?
Well, I really had an eruption yesterday. I was so angry at the, the calisthenics that the White House and the media was performing in order to avoid concluding that this was a terrorist attack. Obviously, the response, the conclusion should be based on facts. But by midday yesterday, we knew that this young man had been in touch with terrorists, was a devout Muslim, put on his Facebook page, or actually his dating site page, that he enjoyed religious readings, etc. And then connect that with the fact that there was this enormous store of armaments found in their house and in their possession, bullets, bombs, tactical gear. Try and explain to me how that is anything but a terrorist attack. A workplace violence? What? A guy leaves a party. They just had thrown a baby shower for him. He leaves a party, a holiday party, in perfectly good form, goes home, gets his wife, and decides to blow up the place. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing, not to just lead to what is, I think, a pretty obvious conclusion. And of course, the reason we can't do that is that the White House has basically spun, for 6 years at least, the narrative that we didn't need military intervention in Iraq. It was a big mistake. That we could get out of Afghanistan, because that also was a mistake. That we don't really need to engage our enemy, Al-Qaeda, in the beginning on the ground, and now ISIS too can be sort of thwarted through bombing raids and so forth, but without boots on the ground. I mean, this narrative that Al-Qaeda was on the run, we had extinguished Al-Qaeda, that with the death of bin Laden, there went that terrorist threat. And the same thing with ISIS. I mean, it's really, I tell you, I think it's really upsetting. And I think a lot of people are upset about it in this country, because it suggests that we don't have the will to fight an obvious enemy. And that, I think, is alarming. It's alarming also that President Obama has done a significant amount of damage, in my view, to the military. We have this huge CENTCOM scandal going on now, where analysts are reporting that higher-ups in the military are forcing them to change their intelligence assessments of how the battle against terrorism is going. I mean, these are really worrisome things. The military, the United States military, has historically always been the most respected institution in our country. That includes the presidency, Congress, every other institution. We believe in our military. And when we begin to see, that they have remarkable and embarrassing failures on the battlefield in Syria, and, for example, this effort to train rebels that obviously was a huge flop, and these ridiculous holds are placed on them in terms of what they are and are not allowed to do. It's really, I think it's really very upsetting and very worrisome.
I know you're very concerned about that, and we all are, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the American people are saying, well, this is crazy. This is terrorism. If the White House and the administration comes up with any other definition, I think it's just going to reflect on them further, which shows up in some of the polls with some of these candidates.
Yeah.
But yesterday, Secretary Carter said, all right, ladies, you're welcome to serve anywhere you want. Another slap against the military, especially the Marines, who said, no, we don't want this. Do you think there's going to, well, I don't know if there can be a pushback in the military, but do you think there is a disdain in the military for this administration?
Without a doubt. The polling of this president is worst ever amongst people in the military. And why not? He hasn't had their back. Our son was in the military for a period of time. He was in Afghanistan. And the general view was that the administration just didn't really want to hear about it. I mean, that they had, President Obama was elected on the theory that everything George W. Bush had done was wrong, that the military was, sort of not particularly to be his ally in thwarting terrorism. And, I think that, yes, that our men and women in the armed services do not hold this president in very high esteem. And who can blame them? This latest thing where the White House has decreed that all military jobs should be open to women. First of all, people should know that now, today, as of today, 90% of the jobs are open to women. One of the few areas of resistance has been, as you mentioned, the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps did quite an ample study which showed basically that in 70% of the tasks that, discretionary or expeditionary forces, the kind of things that Green Berets are involved in, the kinds of tasks that they have to do, 70% of the time, all male units outperformed mixed units that had some women. It is not something that they're being mean-spirited about women in the Marine Corps. What they're doing is looking at women's ability to carry enormously heavy packs and run across unguarded ground. They're bad. They're not as good at marksmanship. There are all kinds of things that the women were not able to do. Our fighting forces like the Green Berets, the Navy SEALs, these are our premier combat units. They are without parallel in the world. They are the best equipped, best trained, and best performing armed services units in the world. Why would we want to change that? I am all for women having equal opportunity, but if one life is put in danger because a unit is not as fast or as strong as it needs to be, that is just incomprehensible to me.
The secularization of the military is another issue which is caught up, don't ask, don't tell, now this. What do you think's behind this? I mean, if the military themselves and the leaders in the military are saying no to this, and you have an administration saying yes to this, what's the fallout?
Well, the fallout is, I think, again, this rift, which I think we're seeing develop between the military and the administration. Thank heavens, we only have a year and a half to go. So presumably some of these wounds can heal in the next administration. But this has been, look, the president has an agenda regarding the military, which is more to do with LGBT rights than it is the effectiveness of the military. And that's what I object to. If it, for example, the president has recently nominated the first openly gay person to be Secretary of the Army. Is that the best person to be Secretary of the Army? Isn't that the question we should ask? Not whether what his gender issue is. I mean, I really, the other issue, of course, that's come up repeatedly in this administration has been allowing transgenders to serve in the military. Most people don't want to touch this topic, but I did write a piece about it because there are serious issues about transgender serving in the military. They tend to have higher suicide rates. They tend to have higher medical costs. Is this a mean-spirited thing, again, to not allow a transgender person to serve? Okay, well, I think the real issue is what's best for the military? What's best for the country? This isn't a country club that we're allowing people into. This is the group that's supposed to defend the United States. And I am sure there are some transgenders. And look, there are hundreds of thousands of women who have served in the military with great distinction. That's great, but let's make that the priority. Let's make performance the priority, not an LGBT agenda that the White House is committed to. I think it's just unbelievable, really.
All right, Liz, I got to take a break. Let me ask you this, and you can think about it when we come back. Given everything we just talked about, what's happening to the military and the downsizing of the military, can we adequately fight ISIS in light of these terrorist attacks within our own borders? We'll be right back with Liz Peek. By the way, lizpeek.com is her website, and she's a columnist for foxnews.com as well as the Fiscal Times. And let me encourage you to read her material. It is top drawer. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, theDove.us.
Okay, welcome back. And again, what a delight to have with us and an honor to have back with us Liz Peek. She's a columnist for FoxNews.com and the Fiscal Times. Let me encourage you to read her articles, and you can go to her website, lizpeek.com. Okay, Liz, we talked about the military basically becoming an agenda item for the president and LGBT, and now we got the downsizing of the military, the restrictions on some of the budgets. I'm just stunned in the middle of this war on terror. Are we prepared to fight this thing?
Well, I think it's a really good question. You before the break, you were talking about fighting it here at home. And of course, that's not really a military issue. It's more probably a surveillance and law enforcement issue. Unfortunately, we are also dumbing down our law enforcement capabilities around the country, again, sort of adhering to politically correct views on incarceration and other things. There are a lot of different issues at work here, but I think Americans need to get behind the idea that, for example, one of the big controversies now is that some of the technology companies are providing cell phones and other devices which are encrypted and to which they have no key, so that law enforcement, too, has no access to the kinds of surveillance and monitoring techniques that did go on for several years in an effort to connect the dots. And I think this recent episode in San Bernardino is a kind of good example where maybe that would have had an impact. I don't know. But if you remember the whole mass data collection concept, monitoring millions of cell phones and so forth, the concept was that if person A got in touch with person B and person A was a terrorist and then B contacted C, that law enforcement should have all those people sort of generally under surveillance. I don't mean wiretaps or whatever, but I mean just generally be able to connect those dots. And it does seem as though this fellow out in San Bernardino and his wife did have some of those connections and maybe should have been, I mean, clearly in retrospect, should have been under closer surveillance. But, you know, I think there are a lot of things going on that probably we should be a little more alert to. One is, again, this technology interference, which has crept up. I heard an FBI investigator talk about 2 weeks ago on this topic, and he was really horrified that there's not been more outcry about it. And it's sort of interesting because I think most people don't even know that the new cell phones that they're getting have this encryption. They don't really care. I mean, I don't care. I am more in the camp of thinking that if somebody is kidnapped, for example, and the police could get hold of the kidnapper's cell phone, it really should be a possibility that they can tap into that and find out information they might need in order to save a life. So those are issues. Look, this is all complicated because we do have the people fighting for personal liberty and privacy in our midst, and those are very valuable concerns. But I think when you're talking about attacks of this kind, where there was no obvious target, which I think perhaps is the most alarming piece of it. Paris, too, they just shot up, you know, a concert hall. There was no particular reason to think that that would have been a target. In other words, up until now, we've all sort of thought, well, yeah, gosh, Grand Central could be a problem, or another World Trade Tower attack is likely. But if it can happen anywhere at any time, I think, you know, the methods we have to sort of anticipate those have got to be reviewed and perhaps enlarged.
Well, there's so much here. Why do you think there is such a reluctance, maybe even a resistance of this administration to call ISIS or radical Islamists for what it really is and go after it? I mean, we're now letting Russia do it. We're just and now we have San Bernardino. 3 weeks ago today was Paris. There is still no leadership. There's a great reluctance from this administration to get out in front of this. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, again, I think President Obama came into office having constructed in his mind a view of the world, and that view has not changed. The view of the world was that the hostilities between the West and the Muslim world were largely the fault of George W. Bush. I think he really believed that, and I think he believed that by dint of his personality, he could go to the Muslim world, as he did in Cairo, if you remember, in 2009, his first big international foray was to Cairo, and he spoke to the Muslim world. And he talked about healing the relationship with the West. I think he really believed that he was going to move the needle. Unfortunately, and by the way, I was in Cairo. I actually was invited to go and be there for that speech. I didn't attend the speech, but I was in an audience of policymakers, Egyptians and other Middle Easterners who were very excited about this overture because they do regard the United States as the most important nation in the world, and they do view it as much too much siding with Israel. So this was a very, very big event to them. The president rattled off all kinds of promises about scientific joint teams we were going to have and free trade zones that we would be involved in, all kinds of exchange policies and stuff. A year later, that group of Middle Easterners came to Washington, held a forum. They were angry. Not a single thing had been pursued. Not one thing had been led to any kind of action on the part of the White House. It was all talk. And honestly, at that point, the admiration and the enthusiasm for this White House began to just collapse. So that was from their point of view. But from Obama's point of view, I think we hear it from him all the time. He talks about universal values. Heads up, these are not universal values. These terrorists, ISIS, these fundamentalists do not share our regard for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or any other values. They don't treat women in the same way, and so forth and so on. So I think he still honestly doesn't get it. He kind of thinks that, it's all a big misunderstanding. And guess what? It's not. So we have two problems. One is that the president, in terms of military leadership, is simply a zero. He doesn't want to be in that position. He's very uncomfortable as commander-in-chief. He's on his fourth defense secretary. That kind of tells you something. Two of the prior ones have spoken out about the president's advisors, that is Valerie Jarrett and Susan Rice, trying to micromanage field generals, literally calling them and talking strategy, which has never happened before. It's an appalling lack of respect for the military and understanding of the military. And I think that's a big problem. And I think on the other side, we have this fantasy world that the president lives in. And I know this has become kind of common practice to pile on him on this stuff. But going back, for example, to that prayer breakfast last year, the president talked about the Crusades and other sort of trigger words that mean a great deal to ISIS and to other radical jihadists. I actually wrote a piece about this, and I went on those websites. They're very sophisticated in their outreach and their propaganda. They use almost exactly the same words as the president in talking about why Muslims should join their fight against the West. And I ask you, is the White House so clueless that they didn't know that? Is he still hoping to leap across the barriers of centuries of animosity and bring these radical jihadists into our fold? I mean, it's really delusional, and honestly, it's turned out to be just wildly expensive in terms of the reach of ISIS now, the spread of it, their capabilities, and as the San Bernardino event showed, if this now becomes, every now and then we have one of these horrendous events in this country, I don't know where we go from here because we're not going to want to develop a police state, but that's kind of the road you travel when there are bad guys in your midst. And now we know there are some.
Wow. Liz, do you think Homeland Security will have the fortitude to raise the terror alert to red. Aren't we in a red condition in this country?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I presume they know. I hope they know. I tell you what, the one person I really have a lot of confidence in is James Comey as the head of the FBI. It was the FBI finally who came out and said, yeah, this looks like a terrorist event. I don't think that I think Comey is very independent of this White House. He has spoken out against the president's policies on lightning sentencing and backing off of law enforcement and so forth. And by the way, he's the guy who is, after all, overseeing the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. I think he is someone we can trust, and I think we will see the FBI petitioning for broader powers, broader surveillance, et cetera. It's going to be interesting to see because they have got to be worried about it.
I agree with you. I get the feeling all along he does not want the FBI politicized like the Department of Justice has, and therefore
Right.
There's even a little bit of a rivalry going on. That has to be healthy.
Right.
Where do you think gun control is going to go? Every time this happens, it's gun control. I just see gun sales going through the roof.
Yeah, every time. Sadly, because people do expect there might be a backlash and there might be stricter controls. Look, I think that there are some I think it's unfortunate that gun control has become such a black-white issue because it seems to me there are some points on both sides. For example, if someone is on a terrorist watch list, should they be allowed to buy a gun? The answer is no. Will they anyway access a gun? Probably. And so maybe people are worried that that list could grow to include all the Tea Party activists and so forth. I don't put it beyond this White House to politicize something like that, but it does seem as though it's awfully easy for people to get these enormously powerful weapons. I don't know how we can change that. I'm a staunch defender of the rights of people to own guns, but it does seem as though there are just an awful lot of weapons that can cause so much damage in such a short period of time. I don't think, by the way, not going anywhere. Obama hasn't really put his weight behind it ever because he knows there are too many Democrats who would be in jeopardy if they agreed with him.
Every time they go after it, there's a turnover in the House of Representatives.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. In closing, I just wondering if we as American citizens now, or when you see the pushback on some of these numbers, let's just take Trump for a moment. I mean, he is representing a frustration. I think his candidacy is representing a frustration. If the White House spins what happened in San Bernardino as anything other than terrorist, I can't help but think that Donald Trump's numbers are going to continue to go up. But it does represent something. It represents a frustration in our country.
It does. I think that Trump has tapped into anger and frustration. I think you're right. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, his polling was beginning to kind of crest and kind of look a little sloppy. And then the Paris attacks came along and whammo, he's back on top. And it is certainly aided, and his popularity is no question, is aided and abetted by President Obama. He is the antithesis of President Obama. All the political correctness that we're all gagging on. And I put myself in that category. I'm so sick of everybody tiptoeing around students on campuses with ridiculous demands and all these things that are happening. I tell you what, Trump, I don't know what's going to make his campaign falter, but if we have the president continue to look so ridiculous, I think you're right. I think Trump continues, to prosper on that.
One other last question back to the FBI. Can you imagine this? We got the leading Democratic candidate for president of the United States under an FBI investigation. I don't know if it'll go to an indictment or let alone a conviction. We've never seen this before, but I just got the funny feeling that this FBI chief is not going to let this be politicized. So I think she's staying in the race to stay out of jail, but do you think it could catch up with her?
Well, again, if there's smoke, and there appears to be quite a bit, I think that Hillary Clinton could be in trouble. I mean, clearly someone is going to be in trouble, and no doubt Huma Abedin and some of her aides may take the fall, quite possible. But it does seem as though there are a number of grounds on which there are legitimate legal issues. Destruction of those 30,000 emails, when it turns out that some of those were work-related. That's government property, and that's illegal. The obfuscation and reluctance, even up until the last round of Benghazi hearings, to come clean about some of the emails and some of the communication she had. You know, if you go through it and spend any time kind of researching it, there are a number of reasons to think that Hillary's in trouble. And I think it's possible that her campaign will be disrupted in some way because of it, whether that's because the president goes to her and says, look, we've got all this and there's going to be an indictment, or you step down, or whatever. I don't know. I don't rule it out. I think it's probably only a 25% probability, but it's at least that.
Well, Liz, you're a delight. Thank you. And look forward to keeping in contact with you. Let me see to our viewers and listeners, lizpeek.com, and you can read her articles from foxnews.com and the Fiscal Times. Just a terrific and thorough reporter and writer. So let me encourage you to read her stuff. Thank you, Liz. And again, Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, we'll be right back.